Well, it's the eve of the one-year anniversary of Dodd-Frank. You know, that boondoggle financial overhaul law, and it's impacting bottom lines. This week, Goldman Sachs surprised Wall Street by announcing a 53% dive in trading revenue because pressures from increased regulations has forced it to take less risk. Here to discuss are the freedom fighters, investment analyst Liz Peek, Montclair State University law professor Bridget Harrison, and Suffolk University economics professor Benjamin Powell. Ben, let me start with you. The folks at Goldman Sachs not feeling too good these days. Stocks under a lot of pressure. They're not taking risk. They are in trouble, and a lot of people are pointing to Dodd-Frank.
Yeah, well, I don't want to say too much about Goldman specifically, but I think your general point about the uncertainty there with the new financial regulations coming into place is certainly true. Economists, we call it regime uncertainty, as people are unsure of what the new rules of the game are going to be. They sit back, they hold back, they don't make investments, they wait to see how things play out and then maybe enter the market. But I don't think that's the whole story. A lot of it's uncertainty, but a lot of it's just simply regime worsening. The policy environment's got worse over the last 3 years with the bailouts, the fiscal stimuli, the QE number whatevers, all going. It puts the government in a precarious fiscal situation, prospect of future inflation. All of these things just make the environment worse. There's certainty that we're in a worse environment, and that's another thing that makes people pull back and take risks off the table.
You know, and Bridget, I got to say, this is something we've heard from everyone. I don't care what party you're affiliated with. We've heard this from Democrats in business. We've heard this from Republicans in business. We've got a tidal wave of rules, regulations, war on business. How does anyone succeed in this environment?
Well, Charles, I think that we do need to look at Goldman specifically. One of the problems that we're seeing with Goldman, who announced, by the way, that they're laying off 1,000 employees, is that they really have been outmaneuvered by their peers. JP Morgan Chase brings in $4.2 billion compared to 1.03. I think that the uncertainty that we're talking about is really a failure on the part of banking financial institutions to shape that regulatory environment. There's so much uncertainty.
Shape or manipulate it?
Both. Absolutely, both. I think that they've focused on the legislative process, not focused on the regulatory process, and they're paying the price right now.
But Liz, it's not just Goldman. I mean, a lot of banking stocks are where they were trading almost 2 years ago. Citi looks horrible. Bank of America looks horrible. People say they can't get loans. Lending is down. Something is wrong. It feels like something is wrong. You don't have to necessarily even be an expert on this stuff to feel something isn't right within the banking community.
Well, I think this is the one-year anniversary of Dodd-Frank, and I think what we've learned is it was a bill that was all about bashing the banks and not at all about preventing the next financial crisis, which is, I think, what the administration had promised that they would achieve. Goldman Sachs is a specific problem because much of their profits over the last 10 years have really stemmed from what's called proprietary trading, and it is exactly that activity that Dodd-Frank is trying to squash. Now, other banks, I am told, are trying to find ways around the regulations about proprietary trading. Goldman Sachs, being so much in the spotlight, being sort of the #1, arch villain on Wall Street, really just can't do that. And so they got hurt. They're being hurt by this bill. But by the way, you're totally right. The broader context of Dodd-Frank is it's basically dumbing down bank profitability. And that really doesn't help anybody.
And before we switch to another topic, Bridget, the idea of too big to fail, that was the overarching theme of all of this. None of these banks have gotten smaller. I mean, even though their stocks are down, haven't they all, in fact, gotten larger?
Absolutely, they have. And I think that shows on some level, a failure of that regulatory environment because they remain too big to fail.
Well, today,
when we have bailouts, it encourages people to become too big to fail. That's been part of the problem.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about that. You're right. They know they can fail because they know there's a check waiting for them at the end of the road. Let's switch here, guys, because today, President Obama, he's really feeling pressure to make entitlement reforms, and it's coming from an unlikely source. Democratic Governor Jerry Brown says he has to cut Medicaid spending by 10% in California if he's going to close the state's $26.6 billion budget gap, which happens to be the worst in the nation. This as that state braces for a huge hike in health care costs as Obamacare is implemented. Liz, I got to go to you on this because it feels like Obamacare took a lot of Medicare patients and they're dumping them on states who are obviously, a lot of them are de facto bankrupt already.
Yes, this administration waves a federal magic wand and expects everything to happen at the local level. The truth is the states are in dire straits, and California, being a chronically dysfunctional operation from the get-go, is probably the worst of them. So why are we surprised with medical costs, healthcare costs continuing to escalate at above average rates, above the average rate of inflation, that the states aren't going to be able to handle this mandate that even exists now, much less the incremental 30 million people who are basically going to be dumped on Medicaid?
We're seeing a lot of Democratic governors do things that you wouldn't expect a Democrat to do. We've seen Cuomo do some things. We've seen the Democrats in New Jersey go with Chris Christie on some serious cuts or pension obligation things. Do you think that the governors can talk to the president and say, listen, this was a well-meaning plan on your part, but it's going to crush us?
Well, I think that that is essential to, particularly at this moment in time when we're talking about debt negotiations. The president and the Democrats in Congress have to realize that in order to solve this problem of escalating debt, we have to deal with Medicare and Medicaid. And failure to do so is really a failure to deal with this crisis. What we're doing is essentially the same thing that was done in the 1980s. We're putting on unfunded mandates on the states, and it will come back to haunt us.
You know what? It's not going to take long to come back to haunt a lot of these states, Ben. Everyone's complaining, and when you get Governor Moonbeam going against Obama, that's one heck of a matchup right there.
Yeah, this is something I don't think you see Jerry Brown really wants to do. He's in dire straits in California. It's the severity of the crisis he's facing that's forcing him to do this. And for the federal government, the chicken just hasn't fully come home to roost yet. They have the opportunity to try to paper this over for a little while longer, but the more pressure states put on them, the better, because the more it will force them to face this problem quicker before it even gets more out of hand.
Yeah, but here's the thing. We were told a year into this we would love it. Now, you may not like it now, but a year into it, you'll love it. What's the likelihood of the administration, maybe having a small mea culpa and saying, okay, we've got to tweak this thing?
I don't know what program the government's ever told me I'm going to like more in a year that I actually did like more than in a year. And I'm not surprised that it's the case here, too, and maybe for lots of other people this time as well.